We are talking this morning about setting goals, New Year's resolutions. And I thought this was kind of appropriate coming on the heels of the elders' budget and goals presentation. And so we're talking about setting goals, having some goals. And, it's interesting because we've done a lot of looking lately at the Who Are We series. We've done that once a month over a long extended period of time. We finished the last one of that just recently, but we've looked at that, and a lot of those came from Brother Alan Webster, and it just so happened that it's been a month or two ago that we had a preachers get together, kind of a luncheon up at I just went blank. Is it Oak Hill in Rome? Is that right? The congregation there, and Brother Alan Webster came and spoke to that group of preachers, and he did a sermon on setting goals. And so much of what I'm going to say is taken from some of his material and kind of modified, of course, and made my own. But I say that to say, as I have said before, if you think, man, some of these sermons Chad have done, they've just been a little bit off, well, then you can just blame Alan Webster. It's all his material. But if you like it, just remember, I changed a lot of it and made it my own. But I am very, very thankful to Brother Allen. He's great. He has some great material, and he's always good to say, hey, if you can use this to the glory of God, then by all means use it. And that's always wonderful. That's what it's about. But, it's that time of year when people talk about New Year's resolutions, goals, and sometimes it kind of seems cliche, but goals, they are very important. I mentioned there, I don't know if it originated with Emmett Smith, but there's a quote. Chris and I were talking about this the other night after making a visit. We were on the way home, and we were talking about the sermon, and I said, I'm going to be preaching on setting goals Sunday, and he mentioned something he'd heard some time ago that Emmett Smith was giving a speech somewhere, and he says, remember, it's not a goal until you write it down. And I heard someone else say, I actually saw several quotes on the internet doing some research that said, until you write it down, it's just a dream. When you write it down, it becomes a goal. And I also saw a quote. This is from his name is Dr. William Mitchell. But he said, a dream is a picture of the world the way we want it to be, or as it should be. A goal is a picture of the world the way we're willing to work to make it become. I like that quote. That's very true. And so goals are important. Paul said, I count not myself to have apprehended, but this one thing I do. He says, I've got this number one goal. Forgetting those things which are behind, reaching forth into those things which are before, I press toward the mark for the prize of the high calling of God in Christ Jesus. That was his goal, one thing. And of course, that ought to be everyone's ultimate goal, getting to heaven. Everything else is secondary to that. I want to go to heaven. I want to take as many people with me as I can. And everything else in my life centers around that. It stems from that. And so we're talking about spiritual goal setting. This could apply to any goals, but we're obviously, in our context, we're going to focus on spiritual goals. And look at this from 4 different angles, as you can see there on your handout. Number 1 being the purpose. Sorry, I thought I'd already advanced to that. Purpose. Why set goals? What's the purpose of this? And some people even say, my New Year's resolution is to make no New Year's resolutions. Well, that's one you're going to keep, I guess. But, why set goals? Is it really worth it? And it may not be something as cliche as a New Year's resolution. It may just be a goal. It may be in the middle of the year. It may be at the end of the year that you decide, hey, I need to set some goals, and I'm going to do that. Why do this? Number 1, it's a way of saying, I'm serious about this. Colossians 3:23 says, whatsoever you do, do it heartily as to the Lord and not unto men. Ecclesiastes 9:10 says, whatever your hand finds to do, do it with your might. And so commit to something. Be serious about it. It's a way of saying I'm serious about if I make a goal pertaining to parenting. It means it's a way of saying I'm serious about parenting my children. Maybe a goal about helping the church, the local congregation. That's a way of saying to myself and to others, I'm serious about this. I want to help this local congregation to grow and to go forward as God would have us to do. And so I'm going to set a goal. Now, it's not going to be a dream, just some kind of intangible idea. I'm going to write it down. You know, you may write it down on just a scratch piece of paper. You may print it out. You may just take a dry erase marker and write on the mirror. I don't know what is your. I've used all those methods personally, but write it down and get it somewhere in front of you on a regular basis. And that will help you to say, I'm serious about this. That's one reason to set a goal. It's also a way of prioritizing. 2 Corinthians 13:5, Paul says, examine yourselves whether you be in the faith. Prove your own selves. There are times when we need to take a step back and examine ourselves and see where I am, where I've been, where I need to be. But you've got to prioritize that, because there are a lot of goals that could be set that are worthy. And you know as well as I do, if you know, maybe you do the bathroom mirror thing, and you know you've got 100 goals stuck to the bathroom mirror, then it becomes nothing gets done. Nothing is really sticking in your mind there. So you want to have one or two that you really get in front of you every single day. You're going to have to prioritize. It's a way of saying when you set a goal, you're prioritizing, but you're saying when you set that main goal, or maybe just a few goals, it's a way of saying, if I don't do anything else, I will, and then that goal. I may not accomplish anything else this year, but I'm going to, and there's that goal. Here's the bottom line. If you don't establish your priorities, someone else will. It may be the children, it may be the school, it may be the bill collectors. You know, you can establish your priorities such that the bills aren't controlling you. You're paying them on the schedule. You're doing what you're supposed to do. But it can get to the point where the bills can run your life and ruin your life if you're not careful. But, you know, there are all kind of things. The boss, children, the school system, coworkers, friends, family. You don't establish your priorities, someone else will, guaranteed. You've got to establish them, and having a set goal or goals, it helps you to establish those priorities. It also, number 3, moves us from remorse to change. It's great to feel bad and realize, I've not done what I need to do. I'm not where I need to be. I need to make some changes. I need to rephrase that. It's not great to feel bad. It's great to have that remorse when you need to have the remorse, but at some point it's got to move to action, right? If you just sit there and say, boy, 2017, didn't really grow much spiritually, not where I need to be. I had a lot of changes that I need to make. And it's just, you just shake your head and go on and on and on. But at some point, there's got to be some action. What action are you going to take to remedy that? How are you going to grow? And so goals help move us from remorse to change. It's also a tool for character building. What is it James says in James 1, beginning at verse 2? My brethren, count it all joy when you fall into diverse temptations, knowing this, that the trying of your faith worketh patience, endurance. But let patience have her perfect work, that you may be perfect, complete, and entire, wanting nothing. And then he goes on in verse 5, and he says, if any of you lack wisdom, let him ask of God to give it to all men liberally, and upbraideth not, and it shall be given him. But let him ask in faith, nothing wavering, for he that wavereth is like a wave of the sea, driven with the wind and tossed. Let not that man think that he shall receive anything of the Lord. And then he concludes that thought in verse 8 by saying, a double-minded man is unstable in all his ways. But when you set a goal, that's a tool for character building. There are a number of ways in which it is. For one thing, one of the main ones, it teaches discipline through delayed gratification. We live in a society that everything is, I want it now. I got to have this right now. There is something to be said for working toward a goal. That goal may be something very secular. By the end of this year, I want to be making this much per hour or this much per year. Or maybe even in 5 years, I hope to be at this point. And maybe in 10 years, I hope to have my house paid off or something. Those are secular goals, but then there are also spiritual goals. The point is, we need to understand not everything's happening right now. And there needs to be some discipline. The word disciple means a follower. Those words are very closely related. Discipline and disciple. In fact, if you're going to be a disciple, you got to have some discipline. There's got to be some self-discipline. We've talked before about church discipline. It's not always in the form of withdrawing fellowship. Sometimes it's instructive discipline. Sometimes it's corrective discipline. But there's got to be discipline. And so that having goals, it'll teach us that I'm working towards something that's not happening right now. But do you know how rewarding that is when you reach that goal and you look back? Maybe it was something that you said on January 1, and maybe you reached that goal early. Maybe it's on into January of the next year, but you realize I accomplished something. It's a tremendous feeling of achievement. It also encourages us to think about living for tomorrow, living in light of tomorrow instead of just simply the thrill of today. Isn't that what happens so many times with people falling into sin? They're looking at the here and now. Right now, in this moment, this is what feels good, or this is what seems like fun. Hebrews 11:24-26 talks about that with Moses. He suffered affliction with the people of God rather than to enjoy the pleasures of sin for a season. He had respect, the Bible says, under the recompense of the reward. He's looking beyond just right here and now, long term, long run, living in light of tomorrow instead of just the thrill of today. Too many people live just for today, and that's what a short-sighted focus does. It looks just at the here and now. Don't be satisfied with who you are just right here in the here and now. Paul wasn't. That's what he's saying there in Philippians 3. And in fact, if you back up one verse to verse 12, he says, not as though I had already attained, either were already perfect, but I follow after, if that I may apprehend that for which also I am apprehended of Christ. He says, I'm not satisfied with where I am. I'm going to keep setting goals. I'm going to keep trying to grow. So why set goals? It's a way of saying I'm serious about it. It's a way of prioritizing. It moves me from remorse to change. And it's also a tool for character building. Well, let's go next and talk about a plan. There's got to be a plan for growth. And really, here, there's a lot more we could talk about. But what I want to talk about in this section is taking responsibility. It's understanding I will be held accountable. Ecclesiastes 12:13-14, he says, let us hear the conclusion of the whole matter. Fear God and keep his commandments, for this is the whole of man. For God shall bring every work into judgment with every secret thing, whether it be good or whether it be evil. In 2 Corinthians 5, verse 10, he says, we must all appear before the judgment seat of Christ. We're all going to be judged. We're all going to give an account. It's required in stewards that a man be found faithful, 1 Corinthians 4:2. And we're all just stewards. Whatever we have, however much or little we have, we're simply stewards. And we're going to give an account. There are three kinds of people when it comes to really a lot of things in life, and maybe just say life in general, but we're going to bring it down to setting goals. Three different kinds of people. There are accusers. Accusers are always blaming somebody else. You know the type. And in fact, you see it right in the very Garden of Eden, the very beginning of time. Mankind hasn't even been around for very long. Eve is tricked by the devil. She eats of the fruit. She gives to her husband. He eats the fruit. God comes looking for them. Where are you, Adam? Well, I was afraid because I was naked, and I went and hid myself. Who told you were naked? Did you eat of that tree I told you not to eat of? And you know the first thing he does? Well, it was that woman you gave me. And he says, it was the woman you gave me, God. So he not only is accusing her, it's almost like he's accusing God. Well, it's kind of your fault. You gave her to me. And then she turns around and goes, well, don't look at me. It was the serpent. He beguiled me. He tricked me. But you see the point, accusing. That's what an accuser does. That's their MO. They're always accusing someone else. Their favorite phrase is, your fault, his fault, her fault, their fault. Never my fault. That's an accuser. But then there are excusers. You see, they always have an excuse for everything. Proverbs 22:13 and Proverbs 26:13 are very similar verses in what they say. The lazy man, the slothful man, the King James says, the lazy man says there is a lion outside. in chapter 22, verse 13, he says, there's a lion outside, I'll be slain in the streets. You know what that is? That's just an excuse. That's any old excuse to avoid going outside. Can you imagine? Somebody gets up and says, man, you need to get up and go to work. You say, look, there could be a wild animal outside there. And I think the safest place for me right now is just stay right here in this bed. I mean, it's warm, it's cozy, it's safe, okay? Well, you know what we would say? What a bum. I don't know, on a day like this, you might say that's kind of smart. It's cold out there. But you know, a lazy man, they'll use any excuse. That's the excuser. I mean, they'll just come up with that there's always a reason, so-called, it's an excuse, why we're not doing what we should do. I don't want to be that way when it comes to my goals, especially spiritual goals. I don't want to just try to blame somebody else. Well, I didn't reach that goal because that's your fault, and somehow find a way to try to blame somebody else. I don't want to be the person that says, well, I didn't reach the goal, but here's why, and I'm making excuses. I want to be a chooser. That's number 3. You see, choosers choose to accept responsibility. I can't think of a better, clearer example of this in Scripture than in the book of Joshua, where Joshua says, you know the verse well, choose you this day whom you will serve. And he goes on and he says, well, the gods of the Amorites, which your father served on the other side of the flood, are the God of the Amorites in whose land you dwell. But as for me and my house, we will serve the Lord. He says, I'm making a choice. I've got a goal, and I'm not going to let anyone hinder me from it. I'm not making excuses. I'm not accusing anybody else. I'm reaching forth, and I'm going to achieve this goal. Are we going to be an accuser, an excuser, or a chooser? Take responsibility for your goals when you set goals, and make sure nothing's going to stand in the way of your achieving them. And then you got to prioritize. You know, start at the end and work backward. What is going to be important on the last day of your life? Have you ever thought about that? You know, as a preacher, I've worked with a lot of people who were dying or near death. Everybody I work with is dying, but some closer than others. You get the idea. It may not necessarily be someone who's right on that deathbed, but maybe you're talking to them and they realize it might be a terminal diagnosis or something like that. Other preachers will tell you, other preachers that have worked with it far more than I have, but they'll tell you this. If there's any hint of spirituality in somebody, there are 3 things they're worried about on the last day of their life. Number 1, you can probably guess, their relationship with God. I mean, how many times do people, they realize, I'm not long for this world. And you know who they're calling for? They say, I want a preacher. Or in many cases, I love it, they call for the elders. That's even better. They say, I want the shepherds to come, to pray with me, to be with me. Because they're worried about their relationship with God. Maybe not necessarily worried, doubtful, maybe a faithful Christian. But that's on their mind. Number 2, you might guess, is relationship with family. And number 3 is the local congregation. Over and over again, and I've seen it myself, but I've heard other preachers say it. You're with someone and they're near death. They don't sit there and say, you know, Brother Chad, if I had it to do over again, I'd spend a lot more time at the office. I'd put in a lot more overtime. I'd make that extra money. I'd really go for that extra work time. I've never heard anybody say that. I've never even heard a very secular-minded person say that. But you'll hear people say, I wish I had taken more time, given more attention to my spiritual relationship with God. You know, my kids, they grew up so fast. I wish I'd taken more time to spend with them. And many times you'll hear people say, I'm worried about the congregation. Oh, I've worked with elders, and they say, you know, I'm not getting any younger. I'm worried about the congregation. Is anybody stepping up to take on the next generation, to be the next generation of leadership? Who's going to be serving faithfully as deacons? Who's going to be teaching Bible classes? And these are things that are on people's mind as they near death. But here's my question to you. And this is a reasonable question. It makes sense. If that's what's important on the last day of your life, if that's going to be what's on your mind, does it not make sense, just good common sense, to give that some attention right now? I mean, studies show over and over, this is what people are thinking about the last day or days of their lives. Why not think about it now and save yourself some heartache? Save yourself some grief, some agony looking back. And I mean, I've sat with people that shed tears, literally, with the regret because of all the time they gave to work, to secular matters. I mean, I've sat with people that shed tears, say, I played so much golf. I spent time, I was into softball, I was into football, I was into this, and now my life is gone. And what good has it done me? That's not going with me. I can't play, haven't played in years. Sometimes you'll see older people say, I spent so much time on that, and I haven't even been able to do that physically in years. And what good does it do me? Prioritize. Paul says, whether you eat or drink or whatsoever you do all to the glory of God. That's prioritizing. That's saying whether I'm eating, drinking, playing, whatever I'm doing, vacations, work, school, among my family, among my friends, among my sisters and brothers in Christ, I'm doing everything to the glory of God. That's prioritizing. You know 2 Timothy 2:15, study, give diligence to present yourself approved unto God. A workman that needeth not to be ashamed, rightly dividing the word of truth. Prioritizing. God's word is going to come first in my life. I'm going to study that, and I'm going to, through that knowledge, make application and be a better servant of Him. And be in the Word every day like those noble Bereans in Acts 17:11. Think about going back through those three. Your relationship with God. That's the most important. Don't put that off. I mean, if you're not a Christian this morning, we're going to sing an invitation song as we always do because there's no time like the present to get right with God. And here in a little bit, we're going to sing that song of invitation. And if you're not a Christian, I hope and pray that if you're of an accountable age and you have put that off, that you will understand this is the most important thing. And you'll come and say, I believe Jesus Christ is the Son of God, and I'm going to give my life to Him, submit to His authority, and I'm going to be immersed in water to have my sins washed away and be raised to walk in newness of life. Maybe as a child of God, you're just not where you need to be spiritually. That may be something that can be taken care of privately. Sometimes that's something public that needs to be taken care of publicly. But understand, that's the most important. Don't put that off. What about relationship with family? Sometimes you got to work on that incrementally. That's not always something, again, we said, start at the end and work backwards. Sometimes we try to do everything all at once. And again, there's that concept of delayed gratification. You can't do everything all at once. But how can I better my relationship with God first and foremost this year? But also, how can I better my relationship with my family? Work on it incrementally, and you'll see improvements. But what about the local congregation? What can I do to improve the local congregation? I think there are a lot of things we can talk about, but one of the things that comes to my mind is mentor someone. Make disciples. I mean, Paul says, 2 Timothy 2:2, the things that thou hast heard of me among many witnesses, the same commit thou to faithful men who shall be able to teach others also. Mentor someone. Encourage them. You never know what you'll do for someone when you encourage them. Help them to grow closer to God, and especially a younger person. And you never know, that might just be the person who steps up. And at the end of my life, when I'm thinking about the local congregation, I don't have to worry about it because we know it's in good hands, and I helped to make it so. There's a principle called the Pareto principle. Sometimes we call it the 80-20 principle. 80% of the work done by 20% of the people, 80% of the results from 20% of the efforts, and so on. I've even heard people say it sometimes even goes into other areas of life. 80% of the time you're wearing 20% of your clothes. It's just on and on we could go. But the point is here, choose wisely. Because you're going to get about 80% of the results pertaining to your goals and in life in general from about 20% of your time. And so where you spend that time, you need to choose wisely. It's easy just to waste time, isn't it? You don't believe it, just try. You don't even have to try. You waste time without trying. It's so easy to do. That's why Paul says in Ephesians 4, redeeming the time. But 4 questions that we can ask and prioritizing, especially thinking about the local congregation, helping the local congregation. What am I passionate about? What am I passionate about? You know, maybe your passion is young folks, working with young people. What can you do to encourage the youth? Maybe your passion is for Bible study. How can you study and grow and encourage others to do that? You know, everybody's got a passion for something. Even a lazy man gets up at 5 o'clock to go fishing, right? Why? Because he's passionate about it. What am I passionate about? Find some niche, some place that needs filling, and fill it with something that you're passionate about. I could also ask, what needs to be done? There may be a need that I can fill, and especially if it coincides with something I'm passionate about, great. Get in there, fill that need. That ought to be a goal as I try to help the local congregation. I need to ask, number 3, what are my talents? What are my talents? You know, I've told y'all before, I'm not much of a song leader. And so I would be foolish to try to use all of my time, say, well, I'm going to try to lead singing, or I'm going to try to instruct young men to lead singing. I think there are enough people here to say, no, Chad, you're not going to instruct our young men to lead singing. But, you know, they're just things, everybody's got their talents. And some things that I'm not going to be as talented at. I'm not saying you should never do that. But especially as you're trying to accomplish goals, and in this context, helping the local congregation, choose wisely how you spend that time. And then finally, what opportunities do I have? What opportunities are before you? You ever thought about just taking out an ad on Craigslist or maybe in the newspaper? Bible study. Anyone interested? Contact this number, or meet me. You can meet here at the church building or find some public place, just meet. You ever thought about just putting a note on Facebook? Anybody interested in a Bible study? Maybe one night a week, something like that. All kind of, there are different opportunities that we have. Maybe you could set a goal that I'm going to have a Bible study in my home on a weeknight each week. But find those opportunities, see those opportunities, take advantage of them. And then finally, practical, SMART goals. You've probably seen this little acronym before. I modified it just a little bit to make it what I think is more accurate. But this is just some practical advice when you're setting your goals, whether spiritual or otherwise. Obviously spiritual here in our context, but the goals need to be specific. That's the S in SMART. You know, I don't want to just set a goal that I'm going to grow as a Christian in 2018. That's not a bad idea, but I want to be more specific. Maybe I'm going to say, you know what, I'm going to read the Bible every single day. Or I may even say I'm going to read through the Bible this year. You see the difference in the specificity. They also need to be measurable. Write it down and record your progress. This is one of the things that I love about the Bible, bookmarks and things like that I've put out in the back, and several of those have disappeared again. I'll put some more, but they're measurable. You're checking off as you finish that day's reading, or maybe just put a line through it or something, but find some way to measure and to record your progress. You need goals that are measurable, and that's another reason for being specific. Because grow as a Christian, well, how do you measure that? That's harder to measure. It might be that I'm reading my Bible more. It might be that I'm praying more. Get specific. And then a lot of folks have the A here as attainable. I changed it to autonomous because really what they're talking about, I think the word fits a little bit better. In other words, I'm not doing this for others. Well, the doctor says I need to lose 10 pounds. My wife's told me to lose 10 pounds. Well, that's not necessarily bad, but wouldn't it be a lot better if you say, you know what, I want to lose 10 pounds? Or, you know, going into the spiritual realm, well, preachers constantly talking about Bible reading. I guess I'll try to read my Bible this year. My wife's bugging me to read my Bible more. Or would it be better to say, you know what? I want to grow as a Christian. And the Bible's pretty clear we grow through time spent in the Word. I'm going to read the Bible more this year because I want to grow. And so it's something that's got to be because I'm motivated. And then goals need to be realistic. Be ambitious. Don't be comfortable and say, well, you know, I'm gonna try to read through the book of Jude this year. You know, that's not real ambitious. But you also got to be realistic and don't set yourself up for failure. There are some things you can't do. You can't microwave a frozen Thanksgiving turkey, okay? There's some things you just can't do. Read through the Bible in a year, that's a realistic goal. But saying, you know what, before January is over, you know, I'm going to read through the entire Bible. That's probably not realistic, especially at this point. Now, I don't know, you may be some kind of speed reader, but I can guarantee you, for me, that's not realistic at all. And so make sure they're realistic. And then finally, make sure they're time-based. When am I going to finish? And that gets back to specific and measurable. When am I going to finish? And of course, the sooner the better, but again, be realistic. Don't try to set some kind of unrealistic time frame. And break your goal or goals down into small goals. Because Alan used this expression, you will be what you are becoming. Have you ever thought about that? The things that make us who we are small decisions. It's great to have a big goal, but you need to break that down into smaller goals because you will be what you're becoming. And who you are is a series of small decisions. There's a time and a place for big goals, but most change, real change, comes from small decisions. Get first things first, and then break it down from there. I heard about an old recipe one time for rabbit stew that said, step 1, catch the rabbit. That's first things first, isn't it? We need to get first things first. As we close out our thoughts here this morning, I read about an 82-year-old man one time, and he made this statement, 82 years old. He said, I'm going to live until I die, and then I'm going to live forever. Isn't that a great thought? My hope, my prayer for every single one of us here this morning is that you will live until you die, and that you'll make preparations so that when you die, then you'll live forever. What is your life? James 4:14 says it is even a vapor that appears for a little time and then vanisheth away. Use your life. Whatever goals you set, make sure you're using your life to the fullest and to the glory of God. If you're not doing that right now, that's why we extend heaven's invitation. Won't you get your life right? Number one goal has to be to get to heaven when this life is over. If it's not, make that your goal, and you can take care of it right now.